The Mindful Medic podcast is proudly sponsored by the Medical Benevolent Association of New South Wales, ACT. The MBA is an independent charity that has been supporting doctors in New South Wales and the ACT since 1896. They provide specialised counselling, information, referral and financial assistance to doctors and their families during times of adversity or hardship. Their aim is to provide non-judgmental support so that the doctor or family member recovers their well-being and independence and, wherever possible, returns to their vocation. Their services are free, specialised and no referral is necessary. All contact is kept strictly confidential and they are independent of any regulatory body. Hi, and a warm welcome back to the Mindful Medic podcast. I'm your host, Cheryl Martin. It's great to be back with what I think is a very fitting penultimate episode to this season. And I really hope in the final episode to bring together some of the great work and momentum that we have seen and shared and listened to in this year in particular. Regular listeners will know that one of the goals of this podcast is really to learn and share excellence in healthcare culture and system reform to support what I consider our most precious assets in healthcare, and that's our people who are showing up day on day to deliver safe, high quality care for patients. So with that in mind, I'm really delighted today to introduce a team of clinicians from North Metropolitan Health Service in WA, who introduced an initiative called the JMO Manifesto. Now, I've spoken about this on a couple of episodes of the podcast recently, including my episode with Victoria Lister, and I will link that in the show notes. As you listen to this conversation, my guests describe really a change in the feel of the place, and that their organisation has done a 180 flip. I think when you hear terms like that, you think they're perhaps describing, a unicorn in building a robust healthcare workforce value proposition. But actually on paper, the JMO Manifesto is quite simple. Indeed, it seems rather obvious. I think what does become abundantly clear when you listen to this is that this really is a team effort, and I think excellence in collaborative, values-driven leadership has really been critical to action and enable this change. I found this an incredibly encouraging and motivating conversation to end the season on, and I know you will too. So before we get into the episode, I'd like to begin by introducing the team.
I just joined as an EDMS at North, and we were about 100 FTE short. And as you said, we were spending millions on locums. And it was to the point where we just had to confess openly something had to change. So how we started was actually over a coffee. It was talking to Robbie's predecessor and asking the team, what do we need to do to really change things for the better once and for all? And the manifesto was so beautifully simple, because what they said back through me, it was they wanted to work part-time. They wanted to be recognised for the work they do and to be paid over time. They wanted to be able to take leave. And they wanted to feel safe at work. And when you say it like that, in that very explicit language, it's almost shameful that our junior colleagues felt like they couldn't have such basic entitlements. So that's how it started.
You just heard from Dr. George Iskander, who is the current EDMS, so Executive Director of Medical Services of North Metropolitan Health Service. As he describes here, he really brings extensive experience in strategic and operational leadership roles and environments, having now served in a number of roles educationally and clinically in both Australia and the United Kingdom. I think as he also emphasises here, in addition to his physician executive roles and responsibilities, he is still very much a clinician and practicing clinician at heart. He trained as a specialist general practitioner in the United Kingdom. I think also very evident he is passionate about ensuring proper and meaningful clinician engagement and really injecting that into the heart of organisational decision making. His approach is very much about empowering his colleagues. Now, this conversation was meant to be a two-way conversation between myself and George, and I think is a really nice window into his style of leadership and how effective that is. He very quickly and astutely pointed out that this is an incomplete conversation without discussing and bringing in the whole team. And so I'm really delighted that Katie and Robbie could join us for this conversation. I think also perhaps evident he is especially passionate about leading organisations to embrace what he calls genuine staff wellness through really enabling organisational strategic reform. Now, this is a recurring theme on this podcast, and I think to see this in a really actionable and tangible form is very powerful. Rightly, he is a very proud executive sponsor of the NMHS JMO Manifesto that you're about to hear all about.
You can actually, as Katie said, you can feel the cultural shift. And we kind of expected it because we could see that junior doctors were much happier, and we could see that junior doctors were much more engaged with work, and we could see that things were changing. So it wasn't just the survey that told us that. We could look around and we could feel that the junior doctors were much happier.
So next, I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Roberta Dumbrava, who goes by Robbie, and she is the Sir Charles Gairdner Hospital RMO Society co-president. She is a PGY3 RMO going into GP training in 2024. And, I think both Katie and Robbie provide so much gold and context to this conversation, and it really is much richer for it. I think also obvious and evident in her work and in this conversation, she is passionate about improving the working conditions of residents and advocating for reform in clinical practice.
The changes with overtime and the changes with leave, they were all about making things simpler, not making it overcomplicated. So I guess my bit would be just simple strategy can lead to really sustainable gains.
Finally, I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Katie McLeod. Katie is a service registrar, and she's currently working in a very interesting role incorporating both medical administration and research at St Charles Gairdner Hospital in WA. And she talks a bit about what that role entails in this conversation. She is also clearly passionate about improving junior doctor wellbeing and what she describes as creating sustainable organisational and cultural change to prevent burnout, foster engagement and promote a safe and supportive workplace culture for doctors in training. I couldn't have put that better. And, I think it gives me so much hope and encouragement to see Katie and Roberta really leading this with another group of colleagues. What I will say is that all in this conversation are very quick to point out that, they are working as part of a wider dream team, and it really is a team effort and sport. So I think I have said enough. Let's get into this fabulous conversation. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. George Iskander, Dr. Katie McLeod, and Dr. Roberta Dumbrava from North Metropolitan Health Service in WA to talk about a fantastic and indeed multiple award-winning work that they have been doing together to improve junior medical officer working conditions, wellbeing, professional fulfillment through the JMO Manifesto, which I may have spoken about once or twice on this podcast, having heard George present on it a couple of times. Before we get into the specifics, thank you all and welcome. I'd like to hear a bit more about you, and each of you have a leadership role in building this service. And so how did you find yourself in that role, and a wee bit about your journey to date? Welcome. I'm just looking to see who I can see first on my screen. I might start with you if that's okay, Roberta.
Of course. Thanks for having us, Cheryl. So I'm Roberta. I go by Robbie at North Metro, and I kind of by accident found my leadership role at North Metropolitan Health Service. I'm one of the co-presidents of the RMO Society with Ellen Hockley, and she kind of just nudged me at the start of the year in January to come and be a co-president. And I actually hadn't had a leadership role before that. I'm quite a soft-spoken, introverted person, but it's been a really good opportunity to learn how to advocate and find my voice and find the junior doctor voice in this role and this capacity. And basically what the role of co-president is really just being the voice of your fellow peers and your colleagues and bringing any concerns to the executive team. So it's a really great journey to work with and with the executive team and find my footing and be able to kind of advocate for all my colleagues.
I think we spoke at the start when we were having a conversation. I heard George mention on the Pomegranate podcast that there was JMO representation on the executive, and I think that's why it's so valuable to have you here today, so I can actually find out what the real experience is from your perspective. So thank you. And Katie.
Yeah. Hi. Yeah, I'm Katie. I'm also from Charlie's, the North Metro Health Service with Robbie. I'm doing a service registrar role in medical admin and research at the moment. Similar to Robbie, I kind of just found myself in more of a leadership role. I've been at Charlie's since intern year and had been working in a variety of clinical areas. And at the start of this year was feeling a little bit lost and unsure what direction I wanted to go in. And it was actually with the support of the executive team, George and his colleagues, that I ended up in this role, doing a bit of non-clinical for a while, and found myself as part of the amazing JMO Manifesto team and as part of the JMO representation at Charlie's, which has been a fantastic opportunity to speak on behalf of all of those amazing JMOs who are working day in and day out on the wards.
Wonderful. And they're lucky to have you. So I can't wait to go into the specifics of what the service actually has been doing. And George, I mean, I think it is it says a lot about you that you have brought the whole team who have co-created this and continue to iterate into the fold. Can you tell me a bit about how you found yourself as CMO and EDMS for the service?
Well, Cheryl, it's so good being here. Thank you so much for the invitation, and particularly for letting me invite Robbie and Katie, whom I'm sure you'll agree are absolutely superb. They're amazing individuals. So I'm the CMO and the acting executive director to the Women's and Newborn Health Service and the North Metropolitan Health Service in WA. We're a quaternary health site. We have just over 1,000 beds. We provide all the state's high-end services. In terms of my leadership journey, I'm very much a clinician first and foremost. I still practice medicine and I love seeing my patients. But I sort of almost fell into it by accident as well. So not dissimilar to Robbie and Katie, in that when I was 23, I was serving in a big tertiary hospital in the UK. And I was asked to cover 3 on-call shifts simultaneously at the same time because we were that short-staffed. And really sadly, one of my patients died on that shift. And I'm pretty certain that death was preventable. So the next day, rather than perhaps escalating properly, I went straight to the medical director as an intern and banged on his door and asked him what he was going to do about it. And in response, threw me. So he said, "What are you going to do about it?" And that's how I fell into it. So when I spoke to my colleagues at the time, I spoke to my senior nursing allies, the allied health teams, the pharmacists, and we pulled together our own equivalent of an after-hour service. This was back in 2009, so it was quite new at the time. And we managed to improve the after-hours care of the hospital whilst running on a reduced staffing profile, but also kept the hospital safe first and foremost. That's how I fell into it. And then over the years, I started to accumulate leadership roles. So I then joined the General Medical Council in the UK, the Foundation Doctor Advisory Board, various health services, and then came out here looking for sun. And before I knew it, I was back again in leadership. So that was my journey sort of until now. And I guess what brings me enormous pride and what really stimulates me to lead is being able to serve others around me. It's all about listening to the voices around you, being humble and modest enough to accept that they know much better than you, and your job is to enable as opposed to direct.
I think that idea of being the conduit and being the enabler, and bringing agency to the people around you has come up several times in some of the conferences and summits that we have attended. And, I have only met you a couple of times, but been very impressed by that as, one of your missions and visions. And so on that, I would like to begin with you, George, if that's okay, having heard you speak about this a couple of times now and present, and really articulate, the challenges that your organisation was facing and that you were facing in a new leadership role, which will not be unfamiliar to many of your colleagues in similar roles in healthcare nationally and indeed globally. I heard you particularly highlight at that time, a 25% shortfall in junior medical rosters, with a 5 million spend on locum doctors and difficulties with recruitment, retention and morale. Can you tell me from a place of those challenges how the JMO Manifesto was born? And really I'm interested in what was the catalyst to make some quite fundamental changes to the way things were done at North Metropolitan Health Service in this area.
Of course, and thank you for your kind words, Cheryl. So our catalyst was back in the end of the COVID period last year in 2022. And whilst WA, I think, had a very different COVID experience to the rest of the country, our challenges in terms of looking after our staff were much the same. And particularly with our junior medical colleagues who are so important to running a health service and are so vital to being our future specialists. And yet the resounding message is they very much felt like they were used. And this very perverse feeling of being really important, but also dispensable. And I think where it hit a real point for us was in June when I just joined as an EDMS at North, and we were about 100 FTE short. And as you said, we were spending millions on locums. And it was to the point where we just had to confess openly something had to change. So how it started was actually over a coffee. It was talking to Robbie's predecessor and asking the team, what do we need to do to really change things for the better once and for all? And the manifesto was so beautifully simple, because what they said back through me, it was they wanted to work part-time. They wanted to be recognised for the work we're doing, to be paid overtime. They wanted to be able to take leave. And they wanted to feel safe at work. And when you say it like that, in that very explicit language, it's almost shameful that our junior colleagues felt like they couldn't have such basic entitlements. So that's how it started. And then we very quickly developed our coalition. The RMO Society at North have been truly incredible in their leadership and really standing behind. And bit by bit, we started to then enact on all of these things that had been spoken about to make it a reality.
And, I think when you articulate it like that, it's so basic, so simple, fundamental. It's common sense, but, in terms of material offerings for employees. But, we know that unfortunately common sense isn't as common as we would like it to be. And that this is not a standard or norm necessarily in our environment. And so, as part of that initial guiding coalition, Robbie and Katie, this is where I'd love to hear your perspective of how this has developed. And, I think I'm particularly curious to hear why you think it has been so successful, where, many others still really are in the aspiration phase.
I think I'll quickly start if that's okay, Katie. I've been at Charles for 3 years, and when I initially started at Charles Gairdner Hospital when I was an intern, it was the least desirable health service in WA to be a part of. It was always consistently ranked the lowest and graded the lowest in our surveys that we run through the AMA. Mm-hmm. And people kind of just said the culture's bad, the exec don't care about you. And when I say that there has been a full 180, there has truly been a full 180 this year. It is a completely different service to what it was when I was an intern. And I think just listening back to the origins of the manifesto, I actually was just remembering the coffee that I had with George and another executive member, Deepan, when we initially met at the end of January with Ellen. And we didn't really know what to expect out of the role and what we were advocating for and who the exec were. And we were quite hesitant about what George and the executive were going to offer us.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there was a lot of mistrust. We thought, oh, here we go. They're going to try to con us into, doing their bidding, and, going to coerce us into doing what they want to do. But it was actually quite the opposite. From that first meeting and every meeting that we have catching up with George and Deepan, there's been quite open communication, and they've been actually very genuinely curious about what our true experience was. It wasn't give us the fake version, give us the sparkly version. They said, what is your actual experience and what are the actual issues? And I think it was a willingness to not only actually meet us at our level and actually hear what we're going through, but also the follow through.
Mm-hmm.
And that eventually fostered the trust that we had, that we thought, hang on, we can actually speak up at these executive meetings. We can actually bring forward our true opinions on what is happening in our health service. And I think that was the first step, is that cultural shift in we actually trust our executive. We actually know who our executive is, and we know they're going to go and bat for us because they actually care about us. And I think that was the first thing that George and Deepan did in particular as part of the executive team, was that they made themselves available to junior doctors, and they made sure that we knew that they actually cared about us. And so that relationship was the starting point for us to feel basically psychologically safe enough to bring forward the issues that we were facing.
And can you tell me, prior to this, was there GMO representation on the executive team?
I think there was always an invitation, but there was a bit of distance. And I don't think it was a regularly attended meeting, whereas this was very different. There was, I get a text message from George, hey, are you coming this week to the meeting? What issues would you like to bring forward? Don't forget to put it into the agenda. And it wasn't just tokenistic. It was a genuine desire to see us actually be on the executive board and bring forward our opinions. And that was a very key difference between what was previously done and what was done this year.
Great. I just think that's worth emphasising, that you had that cup of coffee, you have that relationship, and you have a face and you have a person, you have a point of contact, and you're building trust. Thank you,
Yeah.
Katie.
Yeah, I mean, I guess to follow on from that, I started my journey working in 10 years similar with Robbie, where Charlie's wasn't the popular place to go. It wasn't, it wasn't the most highly regarded place for JMOs, and it has completely done a complete 180. And following on from all of the amazing, and very true things that Robbie has said, is that it's created, I've seen this huge culture shift, what it's like for the JMOs at Charlie's. So, when years ago, the culture around accessing leave was, you apply for leave, no, sorry, too hard, you're not getting your leave, end of discussion. So JMOs felt like there wasn't any room to move, negotiate. There wasn't any, dialogue. There was no collaboration. It was just a, blanket response. Whereas now, particularly with the amazing changes that we've had in accessing leave and entitlements, it's much more of an open conversation. You feel like you can go to workforce, you can go to executive and have that conversation about it. Same things, I guess, with overtime, the overtime culture. JMOs didn't feel safe, didn't feel like they could claim overtime. They felt like it was going to reflect badly on them if they claimed overtime, rather than it being actually, there are system or departmental, or there are other problems or reasons in workflow, which is why these JMOs are needing the overtime, and that they should be, appropriately remunerated for that. And, the changes with which the JMO Manifesto has brought in with overtime claiming, taking away all of those hierarchical barriers, cultural barriers, and making it really open and accessible, and making it very clear that, no, that's your entitlement. You're entitled to be paid for your overtime. And if you're doing huge amounts of overtime, then the organisation, the executive, your teams, your bosses, they all need to know about it, so it can be addressed. So, having an executive who's listening to their JMOs, who's engaged, JMOs who feel like they're being heard, has created all of these downstream cultural changes as a result of the manifesto.
You've both spoken about doing a complete 180, and I understand the most recent AMA survey demonstrates that and reflects those changes very well. Did you want to speak to that, Roberta? Am I right that you have an AMA representative role?
We do. We go to their meetings every so often, once a month, to check in, but the survey that you're talking about is something that is filled in by junior doctors, basically from PGY 1 to PGY 10 plus. So it really captures a lot of JMO voices. And this year we had roughly about 800 people reply to that survey with the AMA across all the health services in WA. And it basically grades your hospital culture. It grades your access to leave, your access to entitlements, and it really looks at a number of metrics. And as I said, back when I was an intern in the start of COVID, we did very, very poorly. We were not performing very well. We were performing at a D level, C level, sometimes Fs with our payroll. But this year we've done very well. We've been able to actually, and I think the thing that I'm most proud of is our culture, and our morale was an A, which is incredible. And across all those metrics, we saw huge improvements, and we ended up being the #1 hospital, which I'm sure George can talk a bit more about. And it's not just the piece of paper reflected on that survey. You can actually, as Katie said, you can feel the cultural shift. And we kind of expected it because we could see that junior doctors were much happier, and we could see that junior doctors were much more engaged with work, and we could see that things were changing. So it wasn't just the survey that told us that. It was, we could look around and we could feel that the junior doctors were much happier.
Agreed.
Congratulations to you all. I mean, I get so excited hearing this. And I think I sent a screenshot to you, George, of the Creative Careers in Medicine platform. And you see that virtuous circle complete when you have doctors saying to each other, oh, we're doing this here. It's a really good place to train. And everybody's like, oh, what are they doing? And there's a lot of energy around that, particularly when it's a platform where there can be quite a lot of negativity. So I do think, again, learning from excellence, how can we spread that? And I know that, George, you've been very generous with your time. I suspect a few of my colleagues have been contacting you. And so, I mean, I think from your perspective as the executive sponsor of this, a few questions, enabling it, one, but also we talked a bit about the financials. I mean, I think, we both agree there's a strong moral, ethical and fiscal imperative to build this, but there's actually a good financial argument too. So I'd love to hear a wee bit more about the process and some of the most recent encouraging data that you have.
Of course, no, thank you, Cheryl. It's a really good pickup there about the financials, and this is actually quite well researched in the literature. So, Tate Senefeld produced a really beautiful paper back in 2021 that looks about the role of organisations in burnout. And his argument very much was that burnout is very much an organisational accountability. And his study said that we recruit people into medical school who are more resilient than the baseline population levels. And by the second year, we somehow get into a level that's less than the population. And worse still, that burnout worsens all the way into mid-career. So it tells you that something's fundamentally not right. So you think then from first and foremost the human element. It's not good for our patients. It really isn't good for our doctors, who are some of the most important people in the hospital. But you also think from a financial perspective, that's absenteeism, that's inability to recruit, inability to retain. It means personal leave and illness and OSH claims and all these things. So there's a really strong financial argument to be had, even if you don't pursue it for first and foremost your patients, and secondly, for humanitarian reasons. So that was our premise. And a lot of the things we've done, which we can talk about in a bit of detail, is really, it's about removing barriers. It's about making your life really easy at work and making people feel really, really valued, because they are. So every time I have a tricky query, it's a phone call to Robbie or to Katie or to someone else to say, what do you think? What's the answer here? And 9.5 times out of 10, they've got the answer. So that was our philosophy. And very much it's the vision about creating the org to serve its healthcare professionals rather than the other way around. So translating all of that into our results a year in down the track. So we're fully recruited, 100% recruited. We're 100% recruited to leave relief. So that means that every single doctor now gets a mandatory 6 weeks of leave. And we really enforce that, but in a very supportive way. It's around people's lives and availability. It means that we've stopped spending on locums. We have a nil locum policy at North Metro for the trial sites where the manifesto is. And from a burnout perspective, our absenteeism rates fallen from 7%, which was our COVID sick leave, down to 2%, which is quite amazing given what the workforce have been through during COVID. And I guess the final thing that really resonates on a personal level to me was our burnout scores in the AMA survey this year compared to last. So in 2022, which was our baseline study point, our burnout rate was just over 20%. So 1 in 5 doctors working in our health service were burning out. And this year, we're now about 13%. So it's almost halved. And comparing that to the baseline for health services across WA, which is more than 30%, it says that actually this is doable. So even if you don't do it because you care about your staff, which I think is the most important driver, then I think there's a really strong financial argument.
I've just had to present the case for ROI on an intangible in business school, and I chose a healthcare wellbeing initiative, and it was really interesting to present to a group across industry and profession and have everyone agree it was a no-brainer. You mentioned some of the specifics of the JMO Manifesto at the moment. I heard you speak on the Pomegranate podcast about a couple of other initiatives that you're all involved in about where this work goes next. And I love that this is an iterative process. There was a couple of, particular, you referenced the out-of-hours support, the sick leave rosters. And so I'd love to see where you are at the moment, what current challenges you face, and, what you would actually like to see and build on this great work. To anyone.
I'll let Robbie go first. Robbie's full of ideas as ever.
Oh dear. George is very good at championing junior doctors, and he's very good at diverting the question, clearly. No, it's a very good skill, and I know that's not the answer to the question, but I think that's also a fantastic thing about North Metro is that it's really nice to see junior doctors like Katie and myself actually be given opportunities in non-clinical roles as well. So I think that's another direction that we could potentially go into, is opening up those areas of non-clinical roles such as research that Katie's involved in as well, because I think, you don't really get a good breadth of that in medical school. But in terms of challenges ongoing, I think there is still obviously a lot of work to be done in terms of our recruitment, as we still recruit a lot of overseas doctors. You kind of finish your intern year and a lot of junior doctors fall by the wayside, and they go out to locum and they go out to travel, and it can be hard to retain staff. At the moment, we obviously are doing very well, but I think ongoing retention is going to be a big key issue that we need to tackle. And one of the ways that we want to continue to do that is to remove the bureaucracy of things such as being able to move between health services where you don't need to redo your paperwork and your vaccination status and complete mountains of paperwork and make it very arduous to come in and out of health services. So I think that's one thing we were looking at, is potentially creating a passport where you can take that documentation and continue it. From a Charlie's point of view, I think there needs to be ongoing work with making sure that we're reporting below the line behaviour. We've done a really good job at setting up frameworks at the moment to make sure that junior doctors can report it in a very psychologically safe way.
What does that look like at the moment, Roberta, that process?
So that process at the moment is an anonymous online form with safe faces. So there is a range of clinicians, and also including myself and other junior doctors who are part of the executive, who are kind of put on this website, and they can basically be contacted for any issues as a point of contact instead of going straight to exec or medical workforce if that's too daunting for them. And then they can go to a link, which is quite easy to access, which helps them pre-fill in information about potential below-the-line behaviour, and then it can be investigated anonymously and in a way that will be at their discretion. And I think that's something that has been a really fantastic thing at Charlie's, that we've got that in place. And also we try to do wellbeing rounds as well to make sure that we're kind of on the front end of this. So we like to go to the wards once a month as a RMO Society. So me, wellbeing officer, one member of executive, DPEN's come a couple of times, which has been fantastic. And actually ask junior doctors during their workday, hey, do you want a box of chocolates, or do you want to sit down and have a coffee? What's happening? Just to actually make sure that we're not only asking junior doctors to come and submit issues to us, but we're on the front end of it. So I'd like to see that work continued into wellbeing that is actually meaningful, not just go do some yoga, go report this. Let's actually talk about wellbeing in a sense that will be good for junior doctors, not only, tokenistically. So I think that's something that we can continue ongoing work in.
And, building on that, Katie, I was reading your bio and I understand that you have a research role as well as, a common interest like all of us in what workforce wellbeing and those system and organisational factors that influence it. Can you tell me a wee bit more about the research component of your role? And we have mentioned Professor Tate Shanafelt. I'm not quite sure how he manages to publish the amount of research in this area that he does. But, I'm interested to see what this could look like for you, and if you have any aspirations on that front.
Yeah, absolutely. And, fitting in with Robbie was saying, the main thing is to make sure this momentum for change keeps going and engagement with JMOs. And I think one of the big issues facing doctors in training now is that the requirements and the expectations of what it means to be a doctor in training and a junior doctor now and to get into training colleges is exponentially, I feel like, getting bigger. And yet the amount of time you have to do it, isn't. And so for things like research, which, most training colleges now, to be competitive to apply for a training program, you need to have done some research. But, doctors in training are very time poor, working full-time clinically on the wards, or doing that sort of research and all of that kind of extracurricular sort of stuff that needs to be done on the side comes out of their personal time, which, when you think about, maintaining well-being for junior doctors, they need that personal space and time as well. So, one of the things that Charlie's North Metro are doing are trying to carve out protected time for junior doctors to do education, to do research, to do their mandatory training, to make sure that, doctors aren't expected or aren't being forced to do these things, which they need to do as part of their job. It's part of, maintaining, their clinical skills and progressing through their career. But it's not coming out of all of their personal time, and they have protected time to do that. So I think that's a really important space that we will continue to make headway in, as well as smaller things now, like, my role in the department, we're constantly looking at ways that we can make facilitating research easier, to make the process easier, to make sure that the resources out there are accessible and people know about them and that they're helpful. Because, as you sort of alluded to, Robbie, I think, we learn a little bit about research in medical school and then you get thrown into the wards and then sometimes it feels like you're kind of a little bit lost and left to find your own way. So, I think another big area is making sure that we can support doctors and other, healthcare staff undertake research, because it's fundamentally so important.
And we started this podcast talking about all of your leadership journeys, and that there is quite a bit of work now that would suggest that the capability of your immediate leader or manager as a work unit has a really quite fundamental impact on your well-being and your professional satisfaction. And, that there is a body of work happening in healthcare. And so, George, I'd love to hear your perspective. And I know that you're doing that through the junior medical cohort, but how do you build that on a bigger scale, not just for people coming through, but people already in the system, particularly those non-technical, non-clinical leadership skills?
Yeah, thank you, Cheryl. It's a really great question. And I guess when you sit and listen to how Robbie and Katie and others, how they create their vision, it's just so inspiring. Like, it makes me so enormously proud of them and others. It goes back to me, this very fundamental service delivery aspect of being here to serve. My job isn't here to dictate or to impose. It's to very much empower and to remove barriers. And so I think when you then transpose it across to a service as big as North, we have in our particular directorate 53 direct heads of departments, so it's massive, and 4 medical directors and a deputy EDMS. So it's a really big team. But it very much starts with this ethos of we are here to serve our people. We're here to serve our patients. We're here to serve each other and to our staff. And for the majority, it becomes about enabling brilliant ideas within reason. Obviously, you can't say yes to everything, but fundamentally, what's being raised are really common, mundane frustrations that stop people from doing their best work. And to give just one small example of how this transpires, Robbie said something really important. She said it's not just about yoga. And all traditionally go to yoga, not out of malice at all, but because it's in our best interest, we think it's the right thing to do. But when you think about it from a patient perspective, if your medical record isn't working at that moment in time, you don't need yoga. You need someone to fix your medical record. And for us, one of the biggest issues that was really causing enormous frustration for all levels of seniority was our payroll processes. Those pay slips are very sadly still inundated with errors because the IT systems are yet to be upgraded. They're being upgraded, but not just yet. So one really simple thing that Robbie and Katie led was the development of a single point of contact, where we trained up one specific expert in medical workforce to take full accountability for escalating every single concern. So you would then raise your concern, they would take accountability to go to the right person, the right time to resolve it. Is it perfect? No, not quite. But at the very least, you don't have to do that yourself because someone else will do it for you. And I guess that's our ethos. So as time has progressed, the manifesto has moved on substantially into payroll, into cannulas, into after-hours staffing, into teaching, into research, because these are the things that at that moment in time is what's causing enormous distress. So that's our vision, is to continually evolve. It's never done. And for me in particular, this element of psychological safety is so crucial. If people raise concerns about bullying, they need to be addressed really courageously, but really quick, because that is one of the most deleterious things that we can do to each other.
And they are difficult conversations, and we need to be able to lean into that. And,
Absolutely.
I think you very well articulated that, when you think about well-being, and I might ask you just as we finish up about your kind of definitions for yourself, but it really, it goes beyond the individual. And I'm a yoga teacher and I completely agree with you. But that efficiency of practice piece and the culture that you're building together, and you're doing that together. Thank you, all of you. I am conscious of time and I'm very grateful that you've been able to carve out some space in a busy work day to contribute to this podcast. Before we go on to the closing questions, I'd love to hear, there's going to be a lot of people listening who are in similar roles to yourself and who are, silently struggling, and you've achieved something, again, on paper, it might seem obvious, but it's actually incredible. And you have done a 180, as you say, and that is, it's really powerful to hear that is possible. So what advice would you give to people listening who, are trying to do this work in their own organizations and teams?
I think we've said it again and again, it's that key of psychological safety. It's that teamwork and being collaborative and inviting your junior doctors to be part of the solution. There's a real power to actually having a seat at the table. I didn't think before this year that my voice mattered, and I didn't feel like I mattered to executive. And that's the opposite of how I feel right now. And that's the opposite of how a lot of junior doctors feel. And just to give you one example, I am currently in ICU on my rotation, and every single junior doctor names the executive by name. They say, oh yeah, George said this and Deepan did this for me. And it's not just this sort of figurehead, this office somewhere, this floating heads making decisions for us. We actually all have a relationship. It's not just us who sit on the board, but every junior doctor actually knows George and Deepan and executive members now, and they know that they want the best for them. There is no sort of negative connotation to they won't do this for me. It's actually, oh, I'm going to email Deepan and it's by name. I'm going to email George and it's by name. So I don't think we need to do any fancy measures. We just need to actually develop relationships across the board between junior and senior clinicians and try to create a vision together.
Oh, I told you there was always gold at the end. That's so well said, Robbie, so well said. And, I think I mentioned to George that one of the most popular episodes on this podcast to date, and this year, has been my conversation with Professor Amy Edmondson, who really, is the founder, I suppose, of psychological safety when it comes to workplaces and organizations. And I think beyond the technical definition, you have just, to describe what this looks like, what it feels like. It's, this is the smell of the place. Very, very powerful. Thank you. Katie.
Yeah. I guess I just steal George's answer a little bit, maybe, but which is just that it's often the simple things that have the biggest impact. I don't think, you need millions of dollars and hundreds of people, to make change. You just need the right people who are motivated, who are engaged, and, who are ready to engage and listen with their JMO workforce. The changes with overtime and the changes with leave, they were all about making things simpler, not making it overcomplicated. So I guess my bit would be just simple strategy can lead to really sustainable gains.
Wonderful. I really love that. Simple strategy can lead to sustainable gains. That really is the KISS principle. Thank you. I don't doubt that you feel immense pride listening to your colleagues here, George. If I could just frame this question for you, though, I am conscious you are in a very senior leadership role in your organisation, and that these are very challenging and difficult roles in healthcare. And, particularly in our current environment, it can feel like you're moving from one crisis to the next. And in that firefighting mode, it can be very difficult to look up and across. But here, you are having achieved, and I've heard you all use the term a 180 flip. You have really achieved something incredible. And that is very encouraging. And so I think, any message that you have for leaders in similar positions is going to be very valuable.
Oh, thank you, Cheryl. I guess coming from someone in leadership, I think I have two messages. The first is be brave and listen, because I guarantee that almost all the answers are to be found within you all. We have some of the world's best professionals in our organisations, and because of the way it's set up, we're designed so that we don't hear their voices. So be brave, make time for it. It's a very deliberate decision to make time to go and have coffee or to round or to give chocolate, to make an open door. But they are the very best investments you can make. And because they will have the answers. And the answers, I'm sure, will be slightly different for every health service and every profession. But there's a lot of similarity. It's ultimately all about respect and empowerment. And I guess the second message I have for perhaps people in leadership is something has to change. We can't keep going the same way we're going. And everyone told us a year ago that what we were proposing wasn't possible. And yet here we are telling the story. So I think it's about sharing our lessons and best practices, and why we've talked so much about it is because we think it's really important. But for us in WA, what we've achieved isn't just North Metro, although I'm very proud of it. It's more so that we're having a conversation across the state for the first time in many years about genuine wellness for our professionals. And particularly the focus on juniors, which I think is very long overdue. So I think it's listen, but be brave and go ahead and make a change, because you probably won't make it much worse.
Yeah, thank you, all of you. I think this is just the perfect season ender for this podcast. Just huge congratulations on all the work that you're doing. Just finally, we have a personal prescription on this podcast, and I actually genuinely want to hear what you're all going to say. Just your own, definition for yourself of what well-being and professional fulfillment looks like. And if you had a self-care Sunday, I know for some of you that will be on a Wednesday, Shift Workers Day. What does it look like? What do you like to do away from work, away from the office? Katie.
Okay. Yeah, my well-being would be spending time with my dog. I've got a cattle dog who's absolutely mental.
Dogs are popular here on this podcast.
Yeah. So when I'm not at work, I'm usually spending time with my dog. And in terms of professional fulfillment, I think for me it's when I come to work and I feel like I can give my absolute best when I'm at work, which, when you're tired and burnt out and dissatisfied and feeling not listened to, I just don't feel like you can really, really do. So being able to come to work and work with motivated and passionate and like-minded people and feel like I can give the best that I can give is what gives me fulfillment in my work.
Fabulous, Katie. So well said. Roberta?
I think we're really blessed to be here in Perth. It's really sunny right now. I think the best thing to do on your Sunday in Perth is either go to the beach or go for a hike. So I like to get outside and see some natural light, which is nice, and go for a walk with friends. That would be my self-care Sunday or Wednesday, whenever. But I think from a professional point of view, what I really like is all the meaningful connections that I'm making at work. Just seeing people actually smiling at work, being able to help a peer and be able to voice their concerns and be able to actually genuinely create some change for them. And also the same with my patients as well, in a clinician aspect, to be able to actually do my clinical role and not be burdened by the non-clinical issues. I think that's been personally very fulfilling this year.
I think, George, you articulated that very nicely. That's why we do this work. That's why we show up. We're here for our patients. Let's help us do our best work.
Well, I'm a Pisces, so for me, beach and water is crucial. And living in London wasn't quite the dream of a Pisces. So every single day on the way home, even in winter, I'll try and jump in the sea, no matter how hot or cold it is. Thankfully, right now it's very nice, and so you get a nice tan in the process. But I find I'm very much an extrovert and really, really love being around people, but also a secret introvert and love just that connection to self and nature.
Yeah.
But I think in terms of their professional fulfillment, it's watching people like Robbie and Katie and many of us flourish. I'd love to think that one day Robbie and Katie would have found their own way. I love to think that the health service would have picked them to lead, because I think they're such wonderful leaders. But also it's just knowing that we've played a very small part and perhaps given permission for people like Robbie and Katie and Deepan and all the others to lead and to make real change. That's the thing that I think gives me the most fulfillment.
I hope you're getting that just listening to this episode and listening to them. And I think that role modeling is essential as well. I just thank all of you. I'm energized and motivated by this conversation again, and I know that our audience will be as well.
And Cheryl, just to thank you for all of your work. It's so important that you and the college have raised it at such an important level. It's a really important national dialogue, and I hope that, as you say, we're infused all collectively to take action. So just to thank you as well for all of your work.
There's a lot of work to do, and I'm grateful that we're all doing it together. So we'll keep chipping away. Thank you so much for your time. I know that you have to head off. Sorry, Roberta. There was just too much gold there.
No, it was fantastic.
Really, really wonderful. You have been listening to the Mindful Medic podcast. Thank you to George, Katie and Robbie for making time to share their work. This is how we learn from excellence. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a colleague. Please subscribe to the podcast. And if you have a minute to rate and review, all of these actions help us to grow this community and share great work. I also want to take the opportunity on this penultimate episode for the season to thank you for your support and for listening, not only this season, but over the past 4 seasons. I'm already excited for season 5. I also want to thank Louise and Julia and the team at the Medical Benevolent Association of New South Wales and ACT for sponsoring the podcast. And another exciting announcement, and there will be more on this in the final episode, but I have spoken about the new website that is coming. I'm pleased to say that as of a few days ago, it is officially launched. And I want to thank Badgemaster for all of their work and support in helping to make that happen. You can learn a bit more about Badgemaster. I think I've spoken about my self-curated name badges and the great group that and team at Badgemaster who have made that happen. And quite a few of my guests have benefited from their great work. You can read a little blog post from me about the Badgemaster badges, and you can also curate your own on the website now. You can also contribute to the Medical Benevolent Association of New South Wales and ACT via the website, and there is a blog page that really is a work in progress, so really hoping that we can grow resources and build our community. But more on that, as I said, in the last episode. In the meantime, thank you so much for your support and for listening.
I think we've said it again and again, it's that key of psychological safety. It's that teamwork and being collaborative and inviting your junior doctors to be part of the solution. There's a real power to actually having a seat at the table. I didn't think before this year that my voice mattered, and I didn't feel like I mattered to executive. And that's the opposite of how I feel right now. And that's the opposite of how a lot of junior doctors feel. And just to give you one example, I am currently in ICU on my rotation, and every single junior doctor names the executive by name. They say, oh yeah, George said this and Deepan did this for me. And it's not just this sort of figurehead, this office somewhere, this floating heads making decisions for us. We actually all have a relationship. It's not just us who sit on the board, but every junior doctor actually knows George and Deepan and executive members now, and they know that they want the best for them. There is no sort of negative connotation to they won't do this for me. It's actually, oh, I'm going to email Deepan and it's by name. I'm going to email George and it's by name. So I don't think we need to do any fancy measures. We just need to actually develop relationships across the board between junior and senior clinicians and try to create a vision together.
I guess coming from someone in leadership, I think I have two messages. The first is be brave and listen, because I guarantee that almost all the answers are to be found within you all. We have some of the world's best professionals in our organisations, and because of the way it's set up, we're designed so that we don't hear their voices. So be brave, make time for it. It's a very deliberate decision to make time to go and have coffee or to round or to give chocolate, to make an open door. But they are the very best investments you can make.
The MBA New South Wales ACT does wonderful work for those of our colleagues who are, at this very minute, experiencing a hard time. One way you can show you care about doctors' welfare is to go to their website, www.mbansw.org.au, and donate today. Knowing that their colleagues care is a big part of these doctors' recovery, so please be part of the solution. All donations are tax deductible. If you can, please consider a monthly donation, as even small amounts collectively will allow them to plan their growth to support the increased demand.